equality. White skies.
It can't be too difficult to say a few letters.
Do I want to share who I am?
Is the LGBTQI plus umbrella letting the rain in? Minority groups in this community of communities are under increasing attack, both virtually and physically, and in the UK and in a number of other countries. Is equality and inclusion progress made in the last decade or so being wound back? What are the causes and symptoms of inequity? How might we support those around us who are being persecuted and isolated purely because of who they are or who they love? Welcome to Wide Skies. I'm Martin York and my pronouns are he, him.
And I'm Debbie Watt and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you to our guests on this episode. Our first guest is Melanie Woolfenden. Mel is an Oracle IT expert working for a consultancy organisation to help customers maximise benefits from their investments. Prior to her existing role, she led a very successful global LGBTQI plus employee network, and she is a founding member of Pride in Tech, a network of networks to raise LGBTQI plus awareness and inclusion in the technology sector. Mel's pronouns are she and her. And our second guest is Bob Green, OBE. Bob is currently working with the LGBT Foundation to develop an LGBTQI plus extra care scheme in Manchester. His previous roles include 14 years as Chief Executive of Stonewall Housing, where he developed housing advice and support services for LGBTQI plus people, especially those experiencing domestic abuse and hate crime. Bob's pronouns are he and him.
So we used our pronouns at the start of the show, and I've been using pronouns after my name for some time now. Why do we share our pronouns?
It's great for people who are part of our communities to understand who they're talking to and who we are. I remember when I first started in an organisation called Stonewall Housing, which is a charity working with LGBTQI plus people in housing needs. And when I first started in 2005, everything around the sector was for lesbian and gay men. So everything was L and G. There was no mention of bisexual people or trans, non-binary people. And it wasn't until a few years later, probably 2008, when our organisation decided to extend its remit and start talking about the needs of bisexual and trans and non-binary people, because those were the people that were coming to us in housing needs. And as we're now growing into 2022 and the different decades, it's become clear our communities are more than lesbian and gay men. They're bisexual people, trans people, non-binary people. Everybody needs to actually say who they are. And for people to feel proud that this is my identity and that my pronouns might be he, she, they, them. And that's something that we need to get into the habit of, I think, to start encouraging people to express their identities.
So it's respect for ourselves and for each other, yes?
I think it's a great way for you to show that you're an ally the community. By sharing your own pronouns, you give people that safe space to share theirs. So be that on your email or be that when you're in a meeting like this and sharing that, put it on social media. It's just a lovely way to say very subtly that I'm an ally. I understand that they're important to you as a person, and not everybody has the pronouns that you might think of just by looking at someone and that judgment. So it just creates a safe space for people to open up and share theirs, and then that may even start a conversation.
I think it's interesting listening to both of you sharing your views about that as well. We talk on a separate episode about how to be a great ally to other people, and I think indicating that you understand and respect that there are differences is a really good thing. I think back to years ago when I went to work for a local authority on an assignment, and the first person that I spoke to before I disclosed that I was a gay man was talking to somebody else about he and his partner, and he was talking about partners rather than wife, even though he was heterosexual and married, and it just signalled to me that he understood there were different types of relationship, and I guess it's in the same sort of vein as that, isn't it? Thinking about how I introduced this, if I could come to you, Bob, I talked about the umbrella, and I've talked about community of communities. Do we actually have a shared community?
We have one in name, I think, and it's great that we're now talking about LGBTQI+, and I think it's great that we're now talking about bringing in different letters to our acronym, because as I've mentioned, we have the L and the G, which have been around for decades, and now we have thankfully brought in bisexual, trans, non-binary, intersex, queer and questioning. when people ask, aren't you tired of the alphabet soup? I think, well, the more letters, the better, because the L and G have had it for decades. Let's have more. It can't be too difficult to say a few letters.
Definitely not.
And add a plus at the end.
Yeah.
But is there a community? I mean, we have the LGBTQI plus community, but I honestly don't think we have an umbrella of communities. We have so many people who are excluded from being in our communities. We have homeless people, for example. Homeless people have facing, eviction, insecurity. They've been kicked out of home, family breakdown. They're experiencing domestic abuse and harassment. And because of that, they're experiencing severe mental health issues, thinking of suicide, self-harm, and being open to exploitation. And where can they go for that sense of community? When Stonewall Housing did a survey of homeless people themselves, they found that LGBTQI plus homeless people were avoiding homeless services because of the homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. But they were also avoiding LGBTQI plus services because they felt the stigma of being homeless.
Yeah.
And they don't, I think, to call ourselves a community, we're losing that sense of community, and we're actually excluding a lot of our community. For example, with poverty, people who are poor, people, especially now we're going to go through this cost of living crisis, which is going to get worse.
Indeed.
A lot of people, especially trans people, non-binary people, disabled people, are struggling to get into employment, and they're already feeling as if they're not part of the community. And when they get poorer and when they suffer greater financial hardship, they're going to be cut off even further from our communities. I mean, I could go on because there's lots of Black and Asian LGBTQI plus people have experienced racism within our communities. Older people experience ageism. Disabled people experience ableism. It's rampant, and it's something that we don't talk about. That our communities, we fly the flag, and it's great to see a progress flag now being flown to expand who is involved in our communities.
Does everyone understand what a progress flag is?
I think it'd be good to say to our listeners.
Effectively the rainbow flag, and then there are the trans colours down the left-hand side, and then we've added the kind of an arrow shape coming from the left to the right, which is for allies, and they've added the black and the brown to that to be more inclusive of people of colour. And then now there's also a round circle in the middle, a red circle, I think it's red, that's for intersex.
Yeah.
Maybe Martin could show that on.
I can include it on the episode information.
We'll definitely have a link.
Certainly.
Definitely have a link.
I think it's interesting, just coming back to what you were saying, Bob, about how Black and Asian people and people who are disabled as well are excluded. I did a piece of work with a network of networks that represented university staff a couple of years ago, and they came from disability networks and from LGBTQI plus networks, and they were talking specifically about Pride, where if you look around, the faces that you see are people that are not disabled, that are white, and predominantly it's gay men.
Yeah, young and beautiful.
And that becomes a problem, particularly as well, talking about the age side of things as well, that if you're over 30, then you're probably over the hill and shouldn't be going out, is how some younger people will see it.
And in Manchester Pride, even a couple of years ago, before we went into COVID, the young people, they were struggling to get tickets to be represented in Pride, because there were so many people that could afford tickets were buying the tickets, and groups and commercial companies getting these tickets and not all giving them the space to celebrate themselves.
And commercialism has been a problem increasingly in recent years, hasn't it? And I think that there's been a bit of a kickback starting to happen with some community events taking place. I think that probably makes me think as well, I wonder whether younger people within the communities that we're talking about recognise the historical struggle that older people have had to achieve the equality that we've currently got, or whether they see it as an assumed right, and whether there's a risk of it being taken away due to apathy.
That's a really good point. A lot of young people can ride the wave that people even before my time created for us, and I can live my life in a same-sex relationship now, free from a lot of abuse that other people haven't had the privilege to be able to do. But like you say, I love History Month for that. It really brings it apparent about some of those things. It really opens your eyes. Something I've done is just educate myself on LGBT history. I think it's really important that we do that, to make people realise some of the struggles that we've gone through. And we're seeing a lot of these struggles now happening again. We're seeing people of colour and Black Pride having to start up to help representation there. We're seeing non-binary and trans people really struggling to get their voices heard. And there's a lot of that kind of agenda coming back in again. And going back through what LGBT people went through a lot in the 70s and 80s, we're seeing now happening for the other parts of the community. And still, you know, there are other aspects that are not being represented, and there isn't visibility for, you know, asexuality and things like that.
And do you think social media is a problem here as well?
The media has a lot to say, doesn't it? It's a very powerful tool. We see things like EastEnders and soaps have really brought LGBT relationships into people's homes and made it normalized in a lot of ways. And it has really helped with the advancement of our cause in the past. But it is really a powerful tool, again, like you said, to actually put down the community. And because people are so aware of media and they get so much access to it, actually you can get access from headlines without actually understanding the truth behind it.
I guess there's a double-sided coin between people who may have been isolated years ago who now have immediate access to other people that are like them, which can only be a good thing. And then, of course, you get the inevitable pile-ons from trolls on social media. You get relatively small groups who can have quite a large voice and effectively shouting into a vacuum that can really destroy people's lives as well. And I guess it comes down to, is social media good or bad? I guess per se it's not. It's how people are using it, and I'm not quite sure whether it's really an accurate representation of real life.
It isn't an accurate thing of real life, but I think it's really important that you take control of your social media. I know myself,
yes,
it can affect my mental health. If I'm not feeling great and I'm looking at pictures of people going on holiday or having a great time and things like that, it can really have an impact on me that I feel I'm missing out. I have to either keep myself off it, or I have to unfollow certain people that I find are triggering. So I think it's really important that you manage your own social media, be self-aware of what you find triggering and what you find empowers you.
I'm sure, Bob, thinking about mental health and well-being as well in your capacities of your previous roles and the role that you're doing at the moment, that you're seeing the impact of the external world on people's mental health and well-being.
I mean, we mentioned earlier about the apathy in young people. I'm not sure we can throw that label just at young people. I think quite often young people are leading the way on social media, and, you know, they're showing a lot of us older folk about how to communicate, how to use social media as a platform. Whereas for me, my late 50s, social media is quite a strange tool, and I'm not sure how to use it, and I can take or leave it. And I know that, as Mel said, it's something that I've left more than I've taken recently because of the amount of grief that you see. But I think it's something, I mean, look, thinking about older people, I mean, when Houseproud, who are an LGBTQI plus housing charity network for staff working in social housing, they did a survey of LGBTQI plus people, and they found that women and men did not feel part of an LGBTQI plus community. For trans people, they felt to some extent, I think 60% of people felt to some extent part of a community. But for lesbians and bisexual men, the difference wasn't so great. They sort of half felt that they were and half felt that they didn't. But for bisexual women, 75% didn't think part of it or feel as if they were part of the community. For gay men, it was 61%. So the majority didn't feel part of the community. So I do worry about broad brushstrokes for people, you know, saying that young people are apathetic, or this, you know, lesbians are feel less part of the community or more part of the community than gay men or trans people. That research did show that there was differences within our community, so we need to be careful in using quick brushstrokes to define ourselves.
It's funny because you say community. I don't class myself as being part of the community, and I guess I'm privileged by the fact of predecessors being able to fight the way that we can now live our lives in our own village community and not have to be part of an LGBT community, in inverted commas. We can navigate our lives without that.
That's a really important point. And I'm wondering whether part of that It sounds like I'm harping on about age a little bit. I wonder whether it comes as a middle-aged man now myself, thinking about I have a settled home life, I have a long-term partner, and so I have less need to go out and do the clubbing and pubbing things that I used to do years ago. And part of that is because I'm getting older and I can't be bothered. But I think it's also because I don't feel that need to have to meet new people all the time, and that would have been the vehicle that I'd have used. So my perspectives on life have changed. People are obviously living longer, and people are working longer as well, and I'm wondering what sort of impact that's having on older people per se, and whether there's going to be a shift at all to more accommodate older people within any of those communities and make space for them in different ways that we've not seen so far, rather than it just being a clubbing pubbing type environment.
I've heard about people going back in the closet again because they've gone into care homes and things like that, and they've felt really uncomfortable about being out.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm sure, Bob, given that you and I are connected for an older person's scheme, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that as well.
Mel's right. That's exactly why in Manchester we're starting to develop the first purpose-built LGBTQI plus extra care scheme. So we can have a scheme that is majority LGBTQI plus, because for so long our older generations have had to cope in heteronormative gender care homes, which have been homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic. I mean, I spoke to someone last year and she was going spare during COVID with the isolation and the loneliness. The LGBTQI plus extra care scheme will not just tackle, the negative attitudes, but it should also promote a positive sense of community, because we'll have about 100 apartments, people living together and promoting that sense of community, as I say, and hopefully it will then be assigned to other cities and other parts of the country to do their own and to be thinking about more choices for our older generations, because most of them are living alone. They don't have the family networks and they don't have family support or friend supports, and many of them, as I say, isolated and depressed and feeling unwelcome, unfortunately, in the LGBTQI plus communities. They don't feel, as Martin said, that the clubbing scene is geared towards the younger generation, and unfortunately the scene is around drugs and alcohol.
So not always that healthy.
Yeah, and so even if you're not older and you do not want to partake in drugs and alcohol, where do you go for that sense of belonging? And unfortunately for our scene is geared towards drugs and alcohol.
And that affects people of faith coming into the community as well. How do they have that sense of community when it's very centered around drugs and alcohol? It's a really powerful issue. And I guess when you have people together that are like-minded, living together in a home, it gives you that security. It empowers you to have that, being able to talk about and be open with like-minded people, which then helps create that safe space and that place where you feel valid and important. So I think that's really important, especially as people are getting older, that they have that opportunity, because often to be themselves, they have left families and friends behind. Not everybody is supportive of our lifestyle.
Just picking up on 2 points that you both mentioned. So Mel, you talked about safe spaces, and Bob, you talked a little bit earlier on about isolation and loneliness, particularly during COVID. And of course, we're all acutely aware people that will identify as LGBTQI plus may have found themselves in situations where they're living with friends or family members who don't know who they are, and so they're having to conceal parts of their identity, which has caused real crises for some people as well. And if we think about how that plays out in the workplace as well as at home, cultures of psychological safety where people can be who they are and be their authentic selves without fear of isolation or bullying or discrimination are really, really important. Could you talk us a little bit through about what we mean by psychological safety? Because it's a really important factor for employers, isn't it?
Absolutely. You mentioned it earlier about talking about partners when we're talking about sharing pronouns. I just joined a company recently, and where I was able to express myself before in a large organization and felt comfortable to come out, to go into a new, smaller organization, I kind of almost went through that coming out process again of, do I want to come out? Do I want to share who I am? Do I want to share, who my partner is with these new people? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to treat me differently? And you're going through this constant risk assessment. And so how do you create that safe space? And we talked about allies, we talk about managers, creating that culture where we can talk about this thing and it's safe to talk about it. So people made me feel comfortable enough to be able to share that, my partner is of the same sex. That has to be a conscious decision to start talking about that. And I found in our organisation, it was much easier to kind of just start talking about topics, not focusing on LGBT or people of colour or disability and ability, but just talking about different things when different days are coming up. So I shared some things on the global chat, and people started to say, oh, wow, this is really important. People hadn't really spoken about that in a work context. They hadn't realized how relevant it was. And suddenly there was an influx of people saying, oh, this is amazing. I've never been able to share about this before in a work environment, and feeling valid and feeling seen. And it was things about, Ramadan, talking about how people can be supportive over Ramadan. That opened up an opportunity for me to share about rainbow and what different LGBT people were and what it meant to be, different terms that we use. And we talked before we started this call about LGBTQIA and all the other letters that we've taken. And what does that mean? Because many people don't understand what that means. And so just doing an education piece about what those challenges are and what those things are. You start that door by opening up the conversation slowly and making it natural, rather than trying to shove in something that's completely irrelevant in your team meeting.
Just making it part of the everyday. And I think it's been lovely to hear you talk about that, Mel. Your face lit up whilst you were talking about it. And it's like planting that seed, and you watch it grow, and you see all the other people that want to nurture that new shoot that's appearing as well. And that's a really wonderful feeling to have, isn't it?
I think most people want to do the right thing. They don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So actually giving people permission to know what's right, and actually to make mistakes as well. To be clumsy. So I think having that safe place for everybody.
That's something a lot of allies say, is they're scared to talk about it because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to offend somebody.
Indeed.
And so they're so conscious, especially outside of our culture in the UK. Certainly in India, they don't talk about diversity and inclusion, for example, because there is so much fear that if they talk about it and somebody says something, that somebody will be offended, and suddenly they'll have a letter from HR. So what they do is they don't talk about anything that's personal.
And we don't want that.
No, we don't. And I think that's the problem. And that's probably a culture in a lot of organizations. So how do you change that culture? And that culture is by talking about things gradually and making that safe space.
To build upon what you've said as well, it's giving people permission, and it's okay to make mistakes. We're all human. It's the learning that's the important thing. And to make people feel equipped to navigate the unfamiliar, I think, is really valuable. And you can only do that by sharing lived experiences and talking as part of the everyday and normalising things.
Yeah, but I think the culture has to be right. I think we're asking a lot of our communities to actually come out with their story. I mean, a lot of us have been through trauma, and we've been through a lot of anxiety, and to actually have to relive that and tell our stories in an unsafe space is quite traumatic in itself. So it's really up to organizations to come out and start talking about things so that we feel more safe talking about our own experiences. And rather than us training organizations need to open up and uplift everyone to be more open about who we really are.
And celebrating everyone as well, celebrating successes.
It's really important not to pick on the same few people and constantly shine the spotlight on them and expect them to perform for you, as it were.
We don't want to be the poster child of that particular group.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I was saying it was down to line managers to bring up that conversation. So rather than individuals being the focus of the spotlight, that they might not want, it might be unwanted, or trying to get volunteers, or you might not even have representation in your organization from that. So just having the conversation as part of a normal conversation and talking about it gives people permission to talk about other things. So you might be sharing about a religious festival, for example, and because you've started that conversation, it might enable someone to feel comfortable to talk about their mental health or something that they've been struggling with, because you're talking about personal feelings and personal things. It opens the door for lots of other things. It's not just one diversity strand.
And also feeling like you don't need to have all the answers all at once. It's a learning experience for everybody, isn't it? And I do this as a daytime job, and I'm always learning from the customers that I engage with, and that's one of the joys about doing this. Question I want to put to both of you, perhaps I could come to you, Bob, first. I'm just thinking about how we support support and educate loved ones and people that we're close to be more inclusive. I didn't know whether you might have any sort of examples that you could paint for the listeners about inclusivity in action.
To me, I think it's all about belonging, and belonging at work and belonging at home and belonging in communities. So if we can generate that sense of belonging. It's interesting because we have been talking about LGBTQI+, but we are something beyond our labels, if you like. And there are even some people, I mean, we haven't mentioned it, but the Q for queer, there are some in our communities that are still quite uncomfortable about using Q for queer, because that's been used as a slur against us for so many decades. So we need to recognize that. As Mel said, we have religious beliefs, we have ethnicities, we have gender, we have disabilities, abilities. We have lots of different things behind us and around us. So to me, it's growing that sense of belonging. When I was in Stonewall Housing, I was also fortunate to be a member of Homes England's Equality Boards, and they are the housing accelerator, if you like, for the country outside of London. And it was so interesting when we were doing our EDI strand, or Equality, Diversity and Inclusion strand. When we actually talked about it beyond the equalities, when we started talking about belonging, and we started talking about mental health issues, and we started to talk about stigma. So we started to talk about being LGBTQI+, but from a different angle. So what's it felt like living with depression, anxiety, and stigma, or living with HIV, for example. So and looking at it from that angle, you suddenly realize we've got a lot more in common with people who are not LGBTQI+, and the people who have experienced trauma, sexual violence, domestic abuse. We've got so much that we can share together, and that sense of belonging came through in the EDI program that we did in Homes England, thinking about those similarities as well as the differences.
Is there a particular tip that comes to mind to you, Mel, about how we can educate colleagues and loved ones to be more inclusive?
I think you've just covered it, Bob. You really summarised that really nicely. It's definitely about, like you say, creating that culture and that belonging. I really like that word, belonging. Rather than talking about EDI, just talk about belonging. And an environment, be it a home environment, be it a work environment, be it any kind of environment. If you feel like you belong there and you feel valid, then that's going to create that safe space that we talked about.
Inevitably, there are going to be conflicts and different perspectives and viewpoints and different rationales, but when we bring together differences, and a common one that comes up tends to be sexual orientation or gender identity and faith, it's always raised as being a stereotype where there's anticipated to be conflict. But of course, there are ways to work on compromise when you take it back down to the basics of trust, respect, honesty, compromise.
Exactly. And it is about respect. Yes. You don't have to agree with somebody's perspective or point of view to respect them. And this is something that I've been trying to educate my organisation, is you don't have to agree to respect somebody. You can treat somebody with respect even if you don't like them.
Really good point.
Very true.
As we've mentioned before, there's such a nasty dialogue going on at the moment. When we're saying, talking about conversion therapy, the ban can apply to some of our communities, but not trans people. Sort of the rhetoric around sexual orientation, gender identity and religion, whether it's a sin, what you call it and what you not call it, and whether you love the person but you hate the sin, all that rhetoric, it does impact on people's sense of self-esteem and self-love, and we do end up then hating ourselves. People who have a religious belief often feel as if they are stigmatized in the LGBTQI+ communities because they're ridiculed for having a belief. How can you have a belief that doesn't accept sexual orientation and gender identity? But that's very narrow, because there are so many welcoming faiths. Even within the Christian denomination, there are so many welcoming denominations. And we have within the Muslim faith, Islam, we have so many welcoming strands. So I think we need to help promote faith and not feel guilty about having a faith. And for quite often, a lot of our communities, they do feel that prejudice, and they have to hide their religious belief, unfortunately.
Malicious voices tend to be the louder ones, whereas kindness, the respect, those positive voices don't come through. A question to both of you. Do you have any tips for being a better ally?
One of the things that we did in COVID, people were isolated, and so we wanted to try and get some representation. So one of the things we did was we created a filter that you can put around your social media. So where you've got your image of yourself on Teams or on Zoom or whatever, is just putting a rainbow filter around there. And you basically just save your picture and then deliver this ring around it. And that was a really nice visible way. We talked earlier about sharing your pronouns. People might well just say, well, why have you got she, her on the end of it, or she, they even, or whatever it is on there. And it can start that conversation just because people are inquisitive, and people are naturally inquisitive to something different.
Starting employee networks of different groups and having LGBTQI plus network if it's big enough, and thinking about how they can be involved in influencing policies and procedures, so that we're thinking about, do you have a domestic abuse policy? Do you have an harassment policy?
Yes.
What happens if someone is facing biphobic, homophobic, transphobic harassment at work? How do we deal with it? So it's getting our communities and your staff to help write those and help look at them. And then looking outside the organization. So thinking about what positive things you can do to celebrate. So rather than just in Pride season in that month, but thinking about how you can work with LGBTQI plus organizations, volunteering time, thinking about ways that you can work with organizations to support them financially as well as volunteer time, because a lot of LGBTQI plus organizations are struggling financially at the moment.
And if I could add a little tip on the end of the one that you mentioned, Bob, about forming employee networks. If you're in an organisation that isn't big enough to be able to support one on your own, one of the things that you can do is contact partner organisations you might do business with who are bigger, and ask if you can be guest members of their networks as well. So that's a really effective way of building relationships.
That's really powerful because that creates that area and that sense of community for your employees, gives them people to talk to and shared experiences and things. The employee networks are really powerful. And there's also lots of networks. So actually where employee networks get together and do things together, not just in Pride. And something that Bob mentioned earlier before we started recording, and that is, we're more than just LGBTQ. So just treat people as people and look for some things that you have some commonality over. And maybe it's not an LGBTQ thing, but maybe it's just the fact that everyone likes football.
Yes.
Or people enjoy going to the cinema or whatever it is, and look at those as kind of a way of forming community. And it's open to everybody, no matter what.
As Mel says, we're more than just our labels.
Yes.
I think that's a really nice place to finish the recording that we've done for this episode. So if I could just finish off by saying thank you both very much to Bob and to Mel for taking part in this. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you both.
Thank you very much.
And here's this episode's self-care tip.
White Skies Self-Care.
Lots of things can get in the way of taking time to look after ourselves. Non-stop audio and video calls, wading through emails and reports, and caring responsibilities. What's the result? We end the day tired, achy and worn out. Today's tip is a simple way to introduce moments into your day to look after yourself. It's called the sticker technique. First, guess what? Find a sticker. If you spend time with children, there's bound to be 1 or 2 stickers around the place, but literally it can be any sticker. When I started doing this about 10 years ago, my first sticker was peeled off an apple. It said Pink Lady. Right, you got a sticker. Now what? Take the sticker and place it somewhere you'll notice it. I have a green dot in the corner of my monitor, but you could place it anywhere. It could be on a door, it could be on a mirror, it could be on your fridge. Just somewhere you know you'll notice it. The sticker is there as a prompt to ask yourself 3 questions. Do I need to stretch? Do I need to breathe? Do I need to hydrate? Guess what? If the answer is yes to any of those, you'll need to do something about it. Stretching. Stretch where you are. Reach up as if you're yawning. Really mobilise those arms and shoulders. You could twist, you could touch your toes. Basically do whatever stretch feels nice and is within your ability. Breathing. Here you can do a simple breathing exercise. Perhaps sit back in your chair. Close your eyes. Place your hands on your stomach and breathe in for a slow count of 5. Hold for a count of 5 and breathe out for a count of 5. I tend to do this for about 5 breaths. And whilst you're doing this, notice your stomach inflating and deflating beneath your hands. It's very relaxing. Hydrating. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to drink, but if you feel thirsty, drink. And it's well worth keeping water handy. So that's stretching, breathing, and hydrating in a nutshell. It's surprising how easy it is to forget to do these things, though it's not at all surprising to know how better you'll feel when you do. You could even, if you've got time, combine all three. Just grab a bottle of water and go for a walk outside.
White Skies Self-Care.
We very much hope that you've enjoyed listening to this episode, and a really big thanks to our guests, Mel Woolfenden and Bob Green, OBE.
And we look forward to catching up with you on our other episodes. And just a quick reminder about how you can get in touch with us and how to access the captioned version of this podcast.
Contact us at linktree/Wide Skies, where you can also find a link to the captioned version of this podcast.
And it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me.
Guy reached 2-2. I'm a safe onward flight.
Well-being. Inclusion. Diversity. Equality. White Skies.
A podcast produced and edited by Majoya Consulting, in collaboration with Bridgeborn Psychology.